All right, welcome to Intro to Cypress testing. So one of the more frequent questions that I get asked about code schools is, why don't they teach more testing? Such an important part of being a developer. Why isn't there more testing in the curriculum? And the answer is kind of complicated. It's not because like the people that designed the curriculum just got it all wrong. It's actually a really hard thing to teach. And then you'll look at some tests and you go like, well, what was so hard about that? The syntax of a test is not hard. You can learn RSpec in half an hour. You can learn Mocha half an hour. There's just not that much to it. Being able to write a meaningful test that actually serves the purpose of helping you develop your app, especially if you're trying to do test-first development, where like you have to be able to predict what the outcome is supposed to be, codify what those behaviors would look like, and then implement to those. That's not really where you start in development. Writing a good test, I think of as like a slightly more advanced thing. So what I'm going to teach you today is I think maybe the easiest way that you could get started with testing, and it's Cypress. Cypress is a browser automation tool. Those of you who've worked in like IT kinds of things before, this is a replacement for Selenium. Serves a very similar sort of purpose. So by the end of this lesson, hopefully you'll be able to confidently set up Cypress on any project that you do. It's not language specific, so it's not only JavaScript apps or only Rails apps or anything like that. If it runs in a browser, you can test with Cypress. And I hope that you'll be able to automate browsers with Cypress. So your main target with this is going to be something like when you're working on a project in Project Week, how do you know whether or not something works? Console logs. What else? Play with it. Use it. Cool, but you could break that down into discrete steps, and I know that you do it because when you're trying to show me why your login thing doesn't work, you're like, okay, check this out. So I go over here, and I type here, and I type here, and I type here, and I create a user account, and then it redirects me to this page, and then let me just log in real quick, and then I get this error. Cool, just write a script that does that. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, you'll be a little bit more confident in that, so you can have the robot do that part of it for you. Questions before we get started?
Is like testing like where development operations kind of like meet, you know, like in terms of DevOps, I know like there's like a cyclical process, and for me it's like testing is like that end step for development,
right?
Beginning step for like operations, and I'm curious how like the two sides of those like departments like who handles what.
That's a great question. So the kind of testing that we're focused on right now is a broad category that's sometimes called developer testing. Developer testing are the tests that developers write to have confidence in their code. And there's like a couple different things that would fall under that. Unit testing, which is a word you may have heard. That's a developer test. Integration tests. End-to-end tests. All of these are tests that developers write so that I wrote this feature and it works. How do you know that it worked? Well, these give me some confidence that it does. So that's not the only kind of test that we have. The real like rubber meets the road, end-to-end test, you could also call an acceptance test, or it could be written as an acceptance test. An acceptance test, conversely, is usually written by a product owner or a business analyst or somebody like that. This is making sure that the feature does all the things that we agreed on. Now, like these have an awful lot in common, and most of the time you really can't tell the difference between them. That's really where those meet. This is, we said that people can log into more than one account, right? Well, that's an acceptance test. you could also write that as a developer test. And there's actually like a really cool thing that I'll teach you one of these days if you remind me, that does both of these at the same time, called Cucumber, where a business person, non-technical, can write a test spec that you can implement as like a developer test. Sort of bridges those two things. But there's also, so you mentioned operations, there's all kinds of other tests also. For example, performance testing. How long does it take the page to load? That it's like influenced by code, but that's probably not something that we would do as a developer test. Accessibility testing. Load testing. So load testing would be like, how many simultaneous users does this support? And you might also draw a distinction there between, do all of them try to do the exact same thing at the exact same time? So that's like a spike or a burst load. Or am I gradually adding users? Because both of those might fail under different circumstances. But all of these we would call non-functional tests. So lots of different kinds of tests. What we're going to learn about today are end-to-end tests. Great question. What else? Yeah, Doug.
The way you said it made it sound like it's overall replacing Selenium.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
accurate?
They're not competitors? It's more like a next generation type thing, or?
No, I would say they're competitors.
Okay.
The thing that Selenium still has over Cypress is way better multi-browser support. So Cypress just added support for browsers that weren't Chromium based last month. So you can do Chrome, Firefox, and Electron now with plans for more browsers down the road. Selenium, completely agnostic. So you could do multiple versions of 12 different browsers. You still need Selenium for that. But Cypress is overall such a better testing experience that even people that need that kind of test coverage will usually do 90% of their tests in Cypress and then a fairly light suite that they'll have Selenium do to just sanity check some touchy spots. But even Selenium testers would much rather use Cypress. Cool, what else? Other questions before we kind of dive in? All right, so here's how I want to do this. I want you to go to some project where you would need to follow a couple of steps to verify if something works. This could be something from React that you did yesterday. This could be your Mod 3 project. This could be a lab that you did. Cypress will work on any of them, doesn't matter. So I want you to figure out what that project is, something where you would need to click on something and verify that a URL is updated or that something was added to the screen, something kind of like that. So I want you to find a project like that, and then if you already have a package.json file, like if it's a React app, for example, you're going to do npm install Cypress. If this is your Mod 3 project, there's no package.json file, you weren't using modules, something like that. Then before that step, you'll do npm init-y, call it a step 0, call it a step 1. But this will work on any app that runs in a browser. So those steps, Cypress is enormous, and all of us doing this at the same time is going to make it take a sec. So let's take a sec, but knock those out. Yeah?
For a mod or a project that you have a front end and a back end.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter.
Should I open both and install both on both?
Probably your front end would be a better place to put that. I did a, let's see, what's one that I did? I did a kennel app, Derulo Kennel Club, for the Mod 3 overview. So my Mod 2 overview app, I have Rails running on 4000. I have the client all run on port 4100. Cool. And this needs to go to the right URL. All right. So this is the app I demoed beginning of Mod 2 with. I'm pulling a list of dogs from an API, and I can also, can't post dogs. Oops, it's because, I'll update that too. If I make this Gertrude, oops, something didn't like about that. All right, there's Gertrude. So we want to write an app that verifies, or a test, that if we go to this URL, we see these dogs, and we can add a dog, and then that dog shows up. It's like exactly how we would verify that something like that works. So I am going to, let's see, is there a package JSON file? There isn't. So I'm going to npm init y and npm install Cypress.
And then what's the -y doing?
If you just npm init, it asks you questions about each of these. We don't give a shit. So -y just enters through all of it. Yep.
So once it like, so I just did the same thing and it put a crap ton of stuff in my node_modules
Yep.
folder.
Correct.
That stuff doesn't get pushed to GitHub, right?
Not if you value your life.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's like a ton of garbage to push
Right.
up for no reason. Right?
Indeed. So I'll show you how we get around that. All right, Cypress is installed. So by ls, yes, my node modules folder is enormous now. I've got this package JSON file. I got this package lock.json. That's exactly like a gem file and a gem file lock. They serve identical purposes, but one of them's for Ruby modules, one's for JavaScript modules. That node modules folder, though, definitely don't want to put that in GitHub. So in a Rails app, you get this gitignore file that has a bunch of this kind of stuff in it. Even if you don't have a gitignore file, if you do the following, you will not push your node modules up. Echo node_modules 2 > signs dot gitignore. That just puts the string node modules at the end. That's what 2 of these means. A .gitignore file. And if it doesn't exist, it makes one for you. If it does exist, like we have here, we'll just add it to the end.
Why doesn't it do that by default? Because it seems like something pretty common that people accidentally be pushing up like a ton of garbage for no reason.
Absolutely. Git isn't like a programming agnostic tool. You don't even need to use it for code. There's those kinds of things in every language. Git's supposed to keep track of every single one of them, keep those up to date. So, ergo, we are left to make our own ones.
I just meant more when you did like npm init or whatever the init command is. Why doesn't it append something with?
Because, I don't know, not everybody wants to do that, maybe. I don't know. There's no good reason to commit your node modules. But you should always make sure that you have done something like that. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you've got Cypress installed in your project. All right, those of you who do not have thumbs ups, what do you need?
I don't know how to articulate my question right now. I have it installed.
Okay.
I'm worried about a gitignore thing right now.
Okay. So the git ignore thing keeps us from pushing node modules up to GitHub, which doesn't send you to jail or anything. It's just
Well, right.
too big.
What I'm curious about is like I have a front end folder and a back end folder.
Mhm.
My back end folder was made with Rails, so it automatically includes a git ignore file.
Ah.
My front end doesn't.
That's fine.
These are both in the root. Yeah.
This works either way.
Okay.
This will add it to it if it exists already, or it'll create it if it doesn't.
It'll create it
Okay.
and add it if it doesn't exist.
Correct.
Well, I guess my question is like my Git repository.
Mhm.
You know, is this kind of root directory that has a front end and a back end
Mhm.
file in it? So
You can put it in either or
multiple
both.
Git ignore files in one repository.
It's like a tree.
Yeah. Okay.
So if you put it high up in the tree, it'll do it everywhere.
Yeah.
You can put separate copies in each one. You can override things. You can do whatever.
Okay. Okay. Cool. All right. Sweet. Thank you.
Other questions about step one?
This is a little screwed up, but all of a sudden my light surface not.
Uh-oh.
Can we get the install command for that real quick?
Yeah, it is npm. I'll do it. Npm install -g light -server. Like that. Other questions about getting off of the races? So, you should be able to npx, not n, npx Cypress open. And it should go, this looks like your first time using Cypress. We made a whole bunch of shit for you. Cool, neat. And if you hit run all specs, you should see a whole bunch of nonsense flying through the browser like this.
Run all specs.
So these are the built-in ones. It's actually testing their website right now.
Oh my god, this is crazy. What was the command again?
I feel the power.
It is npx Cypress open.
Did it just open like its own version of the browser?
Yep, that is exactly what it did. Pretty cool, huh?
Yeah. And you can say you just hit run specs, right?
Yep, that's it.
So I mean, this is testing their site, right?
Correct. Where's the implication being? You test any website, not just your own.
Oh, wow, okay.
Don't do that, it's rude. Because it takes up their bandwidth. Your robot is taking up their bandwidth. But, yeah. Cool, questions about any of this?
So you can mimic any input, right? So you could like use this to make like a bot to play Brad's game.
You absolutely could.
Stole my idea. Get off my high score.
You super could.
Shit spin around constantly, shooting things every direction.
Mm-hmm.
I hate you.
All right, that is objective one.
So that's it. This is just running all the.
So we want to like send it to our website, do stuff that we want to do, but yeah, Cypress is set up. That's what it takes to install Cypress on a project.
Wow.
Yes.
I feel so
npx Cypress open. Other questions?
Yeah.
Okay, so all these tests it just ran through,
Mhm.
these are all just example ones to show you its capabilities?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Awesome. Let's do something useful. So I'm going to kill that off. And you'll notice that it added this Cypress folder to your app. That's got a whole bunch of shit in here. The only thing that we need to worry about right now is the integration folder. Oops. And it has this examples. Those are all the things that we just ran through. And so it might be kind of fun to look through these one of these days and see how it's doing all the things that it does. But it's supposed to serve as like it's called a kitchen sink. It's examples of all the different kinds of tests that you could write. Yeah, Jared.
Sorry, real quick, npm-y and npm Cypress install, do I need to do that on every?
Npm Install Cypress.
Okay, do I need to do that on every project?
Yep. That will associate Cypress with that project. So what we're going to do is we're going to delete all the examples. So we can rm/rf that examples folder. And now, if I were to npx Cypress open, oh shit, is it going to do it in this folder? Yeah, it totally is. This is like, I think this is a hacky fucking thing that it does. So if you run that in that folder, womp womp, it just added the Cypress stuff over again. Dumb. So we can get rid of that. So sometimes you're like, well, where did my test go? Why did it have all these boilerplate tests again? And it's because like you end up with Cypress inside of Cypress inside of Cypress inside of Cypress. So you do have to run the command from wherever you installed it, wherever your package JSON is. npx Cypress open. All right, so couldn't find any files. Let's fix that.
Wait, what command? You ran a rm-rf examples?
Correct. So what we should have, if you go in that Cypress folder, go in the integration folder, nothing in there. If you go into the integration folder, doesn't matter what you call it, just make a file. So we'll call ours whatever the name of your site is. So this is derulokennelclub.js. And then open that up in the text editor of your choice. And let's start talking about how you structure a Cypress test. Cypress is a wrapper around a bunch of different testing tools. So what we call Cypress is actually Mocha plus Chai plus a bunch of plugins and lots of other stuff. So the syntax I'm about to show you is Mocha. It also happens to apply to RSpec and like lots of other things. So this isn't just a Cypress thing. But wrapping any test we write is what we call a describe block. And it takes a string and a function, like that. So we can say page loading. This is the thing that we're trying to test, and it's supposed to read kind of like a sentence. Describe page loading. And then you write a test that would indicate what a successful page load would look like. And you do that with it blocks, which work the exact same way. They give it a string. It's like it loads the page, and then it takes a function. You can have as many different its as you want. It's like describe page loading. It loads the page. It doesn't not load the page. It shows an error if the network is down. Whatever. All the things that would let you know that this successfully happened. You can also nest describes. So you could say something like Network is working. And then you could have another one that's like, network is not working. Describes don't do anything. They just help us categorize tests. Its are what a test is. So if we want to verify that a page loads, the Cypress way to do that is sci.visit, and then you give it the URL that you want it to go to. So like my site is on 4000 right now, I think. 4001. Let's see. 4100. So if I go to localhost 4100, well shit, that alone is a test. Because if it can't do that, it'll throw an error and the test will fail. So I've got this file showing up here. Run all the specs, maestro. Womp womp. What did I do wrong here? Oh, it's because that's on 3000? What? Why? Oh, never mind. It is on, it's on 3000. There we go. All right, so I changed that to 3000, and without doing anything else, I have a passing test. See if you can get a green test also. Yeah.
So I deleted those examples, but they're still showing up, and I think you were saying it depends on where you run.
Where you ran that npx Cypress command from?
I did it from the front end, like
It has to be the same place you installed Cypress. So do an ls for me. Okay. Okay, cool. But did you also install the level above?
No, I didn't.
Okay, cool. So go in your Cypress folder. Go in your, oh, let's see, there it is. Also there. So let's kill those off. So rmrf Cypress. Cool. And I do with that Cypress JSON as well. .json. And then we do that with rmrf integration / examples.
What do you want to use?
Yep, get rid of every last darn one of them. Cool. Now run Cypress open from the root of your folder. Cool. What you got? Yeah, so blow out that entire folder and add another file. So make that an integration. Lowercase. And make a file inside of that. No, I don't folder. Also, use the finder.
Oh.
Oh, no,
Let's go with that. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Integration. Alright. Whatever the name of your file is. Or your project name.
Yeah. I think it's
Alpha spaces. So that'll be the file name.
Yeah, so.
Cool. So now let's take that and make it look kind of like mine, except your port should be whatever port yours is running on. You may notice too
That's where the test is run.
that your app needs to be actually running for any of this to work. Cypress doesn't like launch your app for you or anything. This is why we could do it with the Cypress website. As long as it's running somewhere, we could test Google, we could test whatever we want, but that URL has to actually work because it's just sending a browser there. There's no magic to it.
Wait, so we're running it on Lightsaber, how do we run that in Cypress at the same time?
There, there. Two different tabs in your browser, in your terminal, I mean. Yep, Doug.
So do people generally use like, in a big testing environment,
Mhm.
do people generally use like shell scripts to start up servers and start up this and move files around and then kick off this, or?
It's more complicated than that, unfortunately. And I have been working a lot on trying to discover the best way to do that. So the best way I've come up with so far is with a Docker Compose script. So what this does is keeps track of your front end, your back end, and your database, and assigns them all ports, and sets up your testing environment, and says, cool, do this, then do this, then do this. But yeah, it's a pretty ugly process, which is why I think a lot of people don't do it. Cool, so give me a thumbs up if you got a passing test. All right, I see a lot of not thumbs up. Let's troubleshoot. What you got? Okay. Noted. What you got, Lily?
I have a similar problem.
Okay.
Maybe install every time I try something.
Yep. You got a Cypress inside of a Cypress.
Yeah, I think I'm just like gonna nest it.
Yep.
So
Okay, so for anybody who has a Cypress folder inside of a Cypress folder inside of a Cypress folder, we only want one. So we're in. So I've got this Cypress folder here. Who can tell me what causes the Cypress folder inside the Cypress folder inside the Cypress folder? What causes it? It's not installing it multiple times. Opening it where? In the wrong place. Inside of that Cypress folder. When I run npx cypress open, I gotta be in this folder. If I do it inside of the Cypress folder, it goes, oh cool, I don't have a Cypress folder here. Let me give you one. And so they just keep going in.
Oh, so it's always looking for that Cypress folder.
Correct.
Oh, okay.
And if that Cypress folder doesn't exist, it makes it.
Okay.
So that's why you keep getting those Cypress folders. You could it's easy to delete. There's no harm, no foul if you just RMRF that thing.
I RMRF'd it, and then when I try to reinstall Cypress.
You don't need to reinstall Cypress.
Just
Rerunning Cypress.
Okay.
Who else needs help? Yeah.
I don't need help, but did you say Safari is based on Chromium at this point, or it's not?
No.
Or?
Safari is its own thing.
So like what portion of the market are we getting if we just get Chromium-based browser testing with this? Like,
You're getting Electron, Chrome. So Electron is like a fake version of Chrome. That's what Slack runs on. If you ever make a desktop app with Node, you're using Electron.
but I
You
mean,
get-
are we getting like, let's say it tested on Chromium or on Cypress, but it only tests like 3% of the browsers in the world?
Oh, it's not. It's more than that.
Okay.
You're between Chrome and Firefox. You're getting an awful lot of the market. The significant portion you're not getting. Well, not even the government. That's teeny. The big part that you're not getting by not getting Safari is every single iOS user. You might go, well, I use iOS and I don't use Safari. Yeah, you do is the thing. Every browser on iOS is actually just a little wrapper around Safari. Safari is the only legal web browser in the iOS ecosystem. So Chrome, Firefox, like whatever you download from the App Store, that is a very nice looking wrapper around Safari.
The new version of Edge from Microsoft is Chromium as well.
Correct. Edge is gonna, it's not currently supported in Cypress, but like imminently Edge will be supported also. Yeah.
One more time again with where to open npx cypress open, what directory?
Wherever you installed Cypress at. So wherever that package.json file is.
So I go into the Cypress folder.
Nope. You're going to go right here in this folder. That's where you want to run it. Yep.
So is Cypress like this the same as like our learns? Like you know how we have those tests? It's like speckers here.
So they use RSpec, which is way lower level than this, smaller. And like only works with Ruby apps. This will work with anything that runs in a browser.
Okay.
RSpec is for, where's my little testing pyramid? So we're doing end-to-end tests. RSpec is for this kind of test. That's like call a function with this input and verify that you got this return value.
Okay.
Yeah, AJ.
So you give her all examples.
Uh-huh.
Create a file.
Yep.
Your project name, JS, and then you write the code for the test in there.
Correct.
Okay.
You got it. And it's not picky about what these are called, how many of them are. If you put other folders in here, you can structure your tests however you'd like. It just takes every JavaScript file that's within that folder. Other questions? Okay, let's do something a little bit more interesting. So, all right, cool, it loads the page. Say I also want to test that it shows some dogs. Pretty reasonable, right? So I want to verify that when I load this page, I have some dogs. I could verify that there's 6 dogs, but as soon as I add one, that gets a little bit brittle. How about I just say I have at least 1 dog? So if I take a look at the code for this, all right, I have this dogs class here that I could use to kind of get each of these. So I'm going to say sci.get, and get takes any legal CSS selector. The first trick that you're going to run into, especially with lists, is you might go, cool, I got all the dogs. What did I actually get here? The parent UL. So you go, is there at least one of these? They go, yeah, there's one UL. I care about the LIs that are inside of it. So I go, cool, give me the LIs that are inside dogs. That's how we get an element. We can't do the normal things that we can do with an element. Like there's no like .text content or anything like that. We're in Cypress land now. So this is like a Cypress element. It's a little bit magical. That's the first part of this. The next part of this is the actual test, the thing that we're trying to assert about it. And so we can say .should, and this is the most cryptic part of testing. So some of this stuff you just kind of have to memorize and screw up. A lot of the rest of it you can logic your way through. You really can't with this. I'm going to say have.length as a string, and let's see if I'm doing a comparison though. Have length dot greater than or equal to 1. Let's see if that passes. Cool, passed. And we never saw it fail, which is like an important part of testing. So if I make that 100, it should fail. It's trying, it's trying, it's trying. Not so much. But if I make that 1, now it's green.
So if you wanted to boundary test that.
Yep.
Between, you just add a second line marker.
Absolutely.
Just both 1 and 100.
Should not have length 0. Should have length greater than 1. Should have length less than 100. Oops, something it doesn't like. To have a length below 0. Should not have length. Oops, something it didn't like about that. Should not have length of, maybe. This is this cryptic fucking syntax that I was talking about. If you want a reference for it, these are called chai assertions. You can look up a comprehensive list of these at the chai website, like the tea. Go to the guide. Oops, sorry, API. Go to expect and should. Here is every one of the things that you can do on here. I gave a talk a couple months ago about like how to read these. It's just kind of weird. If you memorize a couple of them, like have length, that's a good one. Or have text is also a good one. If those are the only two that you know, that'll get you pretty far. So I want to say have length of 6. That's green. Questions about this? Yeah, Jared. All right, Brad.
This is a kind of a weird question, but I don't fully understand why we would use testing in. I don't want to be critical. I'm trying not to be critical. I'm trying to stage my question, but it seems illogical to want to write a test and wait for it to turn green, because you're not programming the program. You're just getting your test to pass green. You know, which doesn't make sense. That doesn't seem like testing.
Oh, Brad. That is such a good question. And like that's one of those ones where like you're in a house and you go, I think there's something under this carpet. And you open it up and underneath it is all of Hogwarts. The philosophy of test first testing, I'll go this far, is that as an engineering practice, we need to know when we're done. And so we say when we're done, and then we try to make that turn green. This keeps us from not going far enough. It also keeps us from going too far and doing a bunch of stuff that we don't need. But it requires we know what the finish line looks like ahead of time. And a lot of times that thought process itself is the most useful part of this. All of you have figured out by this point that programming isn't typing. Like, not having enough time to finish your project wasn't like, I didn't have enough time to type it all out. Like, most of the time you spend programming is that. So, writing your test ahead of time is the end result of that process. You're like, what is this supposed to do? Well, I know it works if I see 6 dogs there. Cool. How do I make this test pass? That's the philosophy behind it, and there's so much more past that. Doug, what's on your mind?
I just forgot.
George.
So in a bigger setting, other people would write these tests for
Mhm.
you, and you would just have to complete them, right?
No. But that's very related to that question. Once upon a time, you would have developers, and they do their very important typing developer work. Then you have testers that write all these test scripts. This turns out to be a terrible fucking way to write software. And you'll still see this out in the wild now. We go no, we have our dev team and we have our testing team, and they're enemies. And so it's the tester's job to catch all the mistakes that the developers made. And you go, okay, what if they just told the developers all the things they were looking for ahead of time? Wouldn't that save us all a lot of throwing it over the fence? You go, okay, fine, the testers are on the team. So they tell the developers what they want. You go, okay, cool. But if they knew what this should look like, then they're programmers, right? Can't they also help with the programming? And also, this is just code. Can't the developer kind of write this part also? And so increasingly we see like this blurring of like testing and developing, because they're not different things. They're like different cycles of the same thing. And so you'll find people that like have a strength for testing and people who don't. Those aren't different careers though. Because another thing we found is that, let's say you make a bug or something like that. First of all, you want just psychologically the feedback loop of like, okay, cool, you made a mess, clean it up. There aren't janitors who are like walking around cleaning up your messes for you. And also, you are going to be able to fix that faster than anyone else. You're the one who wrote the code. So that's just another reason to not split these up into a bunch of different things. There are companies that do that. Those companies are wrong. Jared.
Where did you get your docs.li or .docs.li?
So I got that from here by just doing an element inspect. This had a class of dogs. I want to count the LIs under them.
Okay. So basically, this is another reason to not have div soup of crap that's not labeled well.
Hard to target stuff.
Yeah, you can definitely.
Now, there's one other cool thing that we can do. Check this shit out. I love this. This is like my preferred way to do this kind of thing. So you can target them by classes, but like we also target the class of the CSS. And so if somebody adds or removes a class because of some styling thing, now all your tests break. That sort of sucks. So what we can do instead is, this is a pattern called test selectors. So we can add to the end of this data-test-dogs. And now I can make this data-test-dogs li. And now the testing framework owns all this entirely. And we could even write a script that will go through all of our HTML when we're done and yank out anything that starts with data-test-. That's called the test selector pattern. Don't need to learn that or anything, but that's.
Valid HTML without a this equals that.
Yep, indeed, the very same. Cool.
How do you change which browser you're testing on?
Great question. So we go over to Old Cypress. We'll stop these tests over here in the corner. So let's run it in Firefox.
What's Electron?
Yeah, I'm only getting 2 options.
You might not have Firefox installed.
I do.
And you don't have Firefox as an option?
I have the Firefox edition.
It might not be able to do that. Like I said, this is new, like a month new. It might not work with that. If you, actually, you know what? If you have Edge installed, you might be able to use Edge already. But yeah, it can only do browsers that you have installed. And I think there's like a whitelist for those also. Electron is think of it like a command line version of Chrome. It's not super important, but it's Chrome, basically. Yeah, AJ.
This might be kind of a rambling question. So can you like think of a time or a test maybe you performed that you got like a lot of value out of because you performed that test? Like what were the circumstances? What was the context behind it? And like how can you extrapolate that context into like more abstract meanings so that when you're creating tests, like I'm looking for these elements or I'm looking for this out of the test.
Sure. Really good one. Also one that's kind of hard to test a little bit is login. Everything you've tested in one of your projects where you have to be logged in to do something, you go like, all right, cool. Let's just create an account real quick and I'll log in real quick. And then I'll get to the thing that I actually wanted to. Like every time you do that, that adds up to hours over the course of the project. You write a script for that, it saves you a shit ton of time. Another one is tests that you go, okay, cool. The happy path of this works. This is like, I was looking for dog name in the app. Sweet. I enter in a regular old dog name and I click add it. You can also just as easily write tests for like what should happen if you click it and there's nothing in there. What happens if somebody tries to paste a dog name in here that's 4 billion characters or whatever? What should your app do? You can write tests for that, and even like the whole test first process kind of makes you think, all right, well, what should it do? It doesn't tell you what it should do, but it kind of makes you have to account for that a little bit. But knowing what all of those different things are, that's getting into the territory of like, this is why testing is kind of hard to teach in a 15-week program. But at a minimum, whatever you've been doing to test your apps, just write a script that does that. Don't overthink it. That's a perfectly acceptable place to start with testing. Yeah?
What do you call that data test dogs? Like, does that feature have a name if you wanted to like get better at it?
Test selectors.
Test selectors?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to take credit for that, but that's a Martin Fowler thing.
Can you just name it whatever?
Oh yeah, it needs to start with data dash. That's a rule. Everything after that is whatever you want. And test is by convention. It makes it easy to get everything that starts with data dash test dash and yank them out later if you want. But even that's not a rule. Doug.
What other, so kind of like, obviously, the things we're talking about right now are testing visual aspects of the DOM, right? Or at least we're testing stuff in the DOM.
Mm-hmm.
Test stuff like local storage and like the Windows 900 pixels by 400 pixels,
Yep.
that kind of stuff, so kind of more.
Absolutely. You can test all those things. Some of them are harder to do than others. Like local storage isn't hard. Testing how big the window currently is harder, but doable. Yeah, anything that we can see from what we call the black box. You can't test JavaScript. You can't test that like a particular function was called. You can, but don't. That's not really what this is for. This is for automating the browser. So if you could do it in the browser, you can do it in here, and you can verify that something exists in the DOM. And that's the shape of almost every test. We go to the right page, we take some action, and we assert that something is in the DOM. That's 80% of your tests kind of have that shape to them.
All right, and as far as finding out, like, just read the chai docs. As far as, like, for instance, if I wanted to select on your page, the dog name goes here field, I want to write in a name, and I want to click the add it button. That's all very doable and not that.
Yeah, in fact, let's end on that.
Yay.
It adds a dog. All right, so to do that, I need to get that input element. I need to type a dog name in, and then I need to click that button. And then assert that that dog name was added to the list. Couple steps. So I'm going to sci.get, and I can do it by class. I can do any valid selector. How about input? Now that I have that, type is the magic word there. And so I can say what I want to type into that field. And if I just leave it there, it'll still do it. Run my specs. Oops. Ooh, because I have two elements. So since I have two inputs on there, do I have anything more specific? I can do it by name. So I can say input name equals name. Cool, it did it. So, also, neat thing about Cypress, you can click on these and like go to like what was happening in the DOM at the time. So like it doesn't have anything there until I go to this next step, and then it's there. Also, still have, you can console log things. You can still It's a browser. You do all the things you can do with a browser. So cool.
And so something's pretty intuitive, like you did dot type.
Mhm.
For instance, if I want to like just click a button, is it dot type?
Amazing.
Right?
So then I input, type, submit, click, and oops, what isn't it like? So since I did, this is how, I was worried about this. So the way that I teach the mod 2 students to do this, you may remember, is when you get to a create action in Rails, you redirect. Cypress can't do redirects. Yeah, because you're going to a different domain. There's a lot of opportunities for bad shit there. That's why we taught you that at the very end of mod 2 and then immediately taught you a different way to do that. So that's not going to work on this, but you would also like pretty much never do that in real life. Told you guys that. That's the one thing from mod 2 that's like, actually don't do that. And this is but one of many reasons why you can't actually do a redirect. But check this out. If I rerun these tests, I'm going to have that show some dogs one fail because test dog made it in. And every time I run this, I'm going to get another test dog.
Okay, I have a question about the
Yep.
redirect. So like, I mean that Railsy way obviously fails, but
Correct.
if it's in the app I want to test. All right. Once you log in, you know, it posts the login request, whatever, and then I do like a window.location.href to take you to the account page.
That's totally fine.
That's fine.
The reason why is because I made that request to a different domain because it has a different port,
Yeah.
and then I'm asking the test script to follow wherever it sent me. That's the thing it can't do. If it's a different path on the same domain, doesn't matter.
Oh. Okay, but my location href is like just a reiteration of HTTP, localhost 3000.
Totally fine if it's the same subdomain, same top level domain, same port,
Okay.
and same protocol. If all of those match, everything else can be different. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Cool.
But yeah, if we were trying to do that for real, have length greater than or equal to 1, and then I could it's even possible to like save that somewhere and then go, cool, after I do this, the length should be 1 more than it was before. We could say that, I'm going to get these, and then I'm going to get the last one, and that should have text test dog. That's how we'd write these kinds of things. And for a comprehensive list of all of the different assertions you can make in Cypress, if you go to cypress.io, and over to the docs, and over to the API. So these commands, this is the .get, .click, all of those kinds of things. Those are all the ones that we can do there. Then the assertions, this is the stuff that we're passing into those like should things.
What's the chai stuff then? I'm confused.
This is chai.
Oh, okay. It's like
They just copied the chai docs into the Cypress site.
Oh, that's nice.
But like, there's even a link to the full chai ones there.
Oh, okay.
Those are all the different ones you could do. The thing that takes some getting used to, the first thing that's weird about chai assertions, is we have these, they're called chainable getters or chainers. Those don't do anything. Those just make the test easier to read. So like to be bin is have. You can take the have off. It doesn't do anything. Oops. And it still works. Nope, it's green. All green, baby.
I have a test that I wrote, and I said the main page should be hidden, and it passed.
Okay. B
Is changed.
doesn't do anything. Should be hidden. I don't think, is hidden one of them?
I don't know. I was just playing with it in the past.
Yeah, there you go.
Oh shit! Look at me. Goddamn.
That's the cool part about Cypress, is that you can just kind of guess, and a lot of the time you'll be right, but it's way mushier than most programming is. So those chainers, to be bin have, we could also make this green by saying to be bin dot length dot have. We can just make this gobbledygook and green. The only purpose they serve is to make it readable, because if I say should length greater than, that doesn't make any sense. So we say should have length greater than. This entire style of assertion is part of a philosophy called behavior-driven development. And if you'd like to read my slides, Intro to BDD Syntax. So we talk about what those are, and I got some examples of 3 different kinds of particles we have. So chainers are those ones that don't do anything, they just make it easier to read. The assertion is things like equal, text, length. Those are all like things we're actually asserting about it. You can also have flags like not, that just not inverts whatever it is. Deep will follow all the like nested objects all the way down. So we have ways that we can modify an assertion. So, ta-da. Yeah. Other questions you have about Cypress testing? Yeah, it's a lot of fun to play with. So I encourage you to have a good time with this. If you want an example of where this can go, the thing that like I'm currently tooling around with on Cypress is I have a plugin that lets me write these cucumber specs that are written in the language of the business, but actually end up functioning really well as these end-to-end tests. And that is like, I'm over the moon about this right now. I'm giving a talk about it next month at the Vue meetup. But those look like this. So this is incredibly non-technical. Any like analyst, customers can write these. The only magic words here are feature, scenario, given, when, and then. Everything else is free form. So you can write out your entire user story here. As a dog owner, I should be able to add my dog so that I can share my puppy with everybody else, whatever. You can say, like, this would be a lot like your describe kind of thing. And you're saying, all right, given that I am on the dogs page, when I type dog in the form and enter it, then I should see the dog added to the page. And then you have these that translate that into code. And what I also am like really hot on Cypress now is adding these extra commands. Shoot, I'm not doing it on this one. Where like, instead of saying get data test, whatever the fuck, you can also do things like Cypress cucumber. I made these extra commands like the first, click the, fill out the, that allow you to write, I mean, they look just like sentences. So the equivalent thing in our app would look like it loads the page. There we go. So this would be like the it would be something like that, and then that would work if we made this data-test-dogs, or if we added that to all the LIs or something like that. And if we're filling out a form, we could say like fill out the and then you can give it an object with the names and the values that you want them to have. And then it submits at the end. Cypress is cool as hell. But don't feel bad if like you leave this program and like you're not all the way there with testing. It's really like a more advanced thing than I think it gets given credit for a lot of the time. Yeah.
Like, you're saying we could use it to like break Brad's game.
Yes.
Is that a good way to get good at it? Would that be like a useful way? It sounds like it'd be hard, honestly. I don't know.
I don't know. Like Brad, you use a lot of I think he used a lot of like Canvas and stuff. So that gets hard because you can make it program like a specific like set of commands pretty easily. You can say, so if I'm trying to break Brad's game, I can do something like sci.get whatever the top level thing is, and then type, and then you can do things like that, and that's the equivalent of like hitting the right key or whatever. Then you can also do sci.wait and put how many milliseconds you want it to wait, and then stuff like that. But if you're trying to do it based on some state that's in the game, now you need to like read that out of the canvas, which is fucking hard, and then do this. There might be some timing issues there, but yeah, you can play the game. If you can do it in a browser, you can do it in Cypress. Except for, there's one thing you can't do, and I think this is so fucked up. They're working on it. Let's say I had multiple inputs in the form. You can't tab between the inputs. If you try to do it, if you try to like get to the end and type tab, it throws a warning. It's like, I see what you're trying to do. No.
What about enters for submitting forms?
That works.
That does.
Yep. Great question. So the way almost every Cypress assertion works is it just waits. I think by default it waits for 5 seconds or something for it to happen. So you generally don't have to handle the asynchronous stuff directly. But you could do something like, you're always trying to think of it from the user's perspective. So I enter the form, how do I know that it's done? I get a confirmation message down at the bottom. Cool, so you're waiting for that like confirmation message to show up. Takes you to a different page, you go, cool, so then the URL should be this. You can override timeouts, like sometimes this takes a long time, so you should wait at least 10 seconds. But at some point, a user would consider something to have failed after a while. So that's what your timeouts are supposed to be based on. It's like, all right, if your user would give up after 6 seconds, then set a 6-second timeout on it. Because even if it does eventually work, you really kind of have failed from the user's perspective at that point. The thing you don't want to do, and this is like a really tempting thing, is, all right, I do some form dot click. Now, wait for 3 seconds. Like, you know you're in trouble once you start doing these kinds of things, because the problem is, let's say this gets done in half a second. You have 2.5 seconds where you're doing shit. And if you have 10 tests, 100 tests, 10,000 tests, and you have these sprinkled all over them, that's just dead time. It's making your test suite take half a day to run. And really, like by that point, the tests aren't useful anymore. Because if your feedback loop takes that long, you can't use that. And so you start ignoring your tests, and now what was the point of writing them to begin with? Cool. Anything else? Go write some tests. Pew, pew, pew. What's up, George?